Chapter 8. Following the walk with Korth, there was a long list of duties I had to tend to in order for my fellow rebels to get comfortably settled. Korth, determined to tend to my every need, led me throughout the estate as I checked on the accommodations and sent a missive to ensure that the façade was properly docked and all cargo unloaded. Right before the evening meal, I received word that Garrick and his 2 children had been settled at the Gooseherd's cottage. As much as I wanted to dash down to check on Odette, I restrained myself. The rebellion would only be successful if each member did their part. My part was charming Korth, not babysitting a spoiled princess. The evening meal was held in a large banquet hall, and so many people introduced themselves to me that I knew I'd never keep them all straight. Most looked very similar to Korth, exceptionally tall with dark hair and tanned skin, though a few had lighter hair and fairer complexions, but bore a strong family resemblance nonetheless. The only people I committed to memory were Korth's parents, Queen Serena and King Orion, who were both gracious and welcoming. One of Korth's cousins was a blond man about my age, who was every bit as animated and talkative as Tess, but was especially noticeable because he signed with his hands as he talked, and I felt mesmerized by it. A tall, visibly muscular girl who didn't speak all evening would occasionally sign back to him, and she was accompanied by an enormous man with olive skin and shoulder-length black hair who also signed. I kept pulling my attention away from them, determined not to rudely stare at any of Korth's family members. Conversation went on for what felt like hours. I felt the way Korth must have during our turn around the lake as I pumped him for information, trying to put him at ease. His family asked me endless questions about Ibora, my voyage here, my interests and hobbies, and so many other things that I barely managed to eat anything. My fingers slowly crumpled my napkin in my lap as I tried to blot away the perspiration beading out of my palms. "Treva says we should let Odette rest," the blonde cousin finally said, nodding at the tall young woman who hadn't spoken a word all meal. "And that not everyone likes talking as much as our family, especially since she only arrived this morning." "Of course, you must be exhausted. We've simply been so eager to meet you," Queen Serena said, signaling for the waitstaff to clear the dishes. "We'll let you retire." I threw a glance Treva's way, and her eyes flicked down to where my hand had crumpled my napkin. I hastily released it, surprised that she had picked up on such a tiny visual cue when I had been doing my best to hide my nervousness. But I couldn't help but be grateful. The knot in my stomach had grown all evening as I did my utmost to answer questions as a princess would, while bearing in mind everything I'd written in the letters over the years and still trying to remain charming. The weight of the day settled over me as Korth escorted me back, and I felt fatigued in every way possible. No day had ever lasted so long, not even when Odette had me pick out each of her mistakes from the last month's worth of sewing. Everything had been carried out exactly as planned. I had been accepted without question. But the constant anxiety of making a mistake was heavy on my mind, and my muscles tensed up my back all the way through my neck. "Good night," Korth stated, bowing stiffly over my hand. "Good night." I couldn't even work up the energy to wonder what he thought about me. Gerda helped me out of my gown. Then, as I pulled pins from my hair, she crossed to a set of cabinet doors I hadn't had time to examine yet. When she opened them, there wasn't shelving or a rod to hang dresses on as I'd expected. Instead, a dumbwaiter 4 times the size of what we had in Ibora was there, large enough for 2 men to comfortably sit in. I paused in unpinning my hair as Gerda placed my garments from the day on it and tugged on a moss green cord. Somewhere far below, a bell clanged. Gerda withdrew her head, and as she closed the cabinet doors again, I caught a glimpse of the platform lowering noiselessly, a vast difference from the grinding gears that always accompanied the dumbwaiter in Ibora. "That's an impressive mechanism," I commented as I placed the final hairpin on the table. The ones back home were much smaller and noisier. "How does it work?" "It's a fairly recent addition," Gerda said, coming over to brush my hair. But the explanation of its operation is rather tedious. I'm sure you wouldn't want— I'm very interested, I assured her. What's transported in there besides laundry? All sorts of things. Just last week, when we were furnishing this room to prepare for your arrival, the men used it to bring up chairs and bedding. It's much faster than climbing all those stairs. It can even be operated from the inside. Can it? I asked curiously. Gerda, deciding that I was sincerely interested, nodded eagerly. No more page boys blocking the way trying to navigate around the winding steps while carrying tables. There is a much larger dumbwaiter in the West Wing for transporting the large furniture. This one connects all the rooms for the royal family's laundry and smaller loads to be delivered to the bedrooms and such. So it connects to Tess's room? Hers is the room directly below us. You may hear her singing from time to time. Prince Korth's rooms are below hers, though he doesn't sing. Gerda went on, picking at a resilient snarl in my hair. The rooms are all stacked on top of each other. That's very convenient, I mused. How so, Your Highness? I looked up at Gerda in the vanity mirror's reflection. I would assume it would be much more convenient to have an attendant always on call at the bottom of one dumbwaiter, as opposed to several. It is, isn't it? She mused, plaiting my hair swiftly. There, you're all set. Thank you. I patted my hair and looked again at the doors hiding the dumbwaiter. What are the different cords for? Green for laundry, red to call the guards, yellow for meals, that sort of thing. A sudden stricken look came over her face. I'm so sorry. I ought to have told you before so you could call for service. No need, I'm simply interested. You go ahead and get some rest. I smiled pleasantly as she left. Once the door clicked shut, I crossed the room to run my hand over the cabinet's carved door. How very convenient indeed. Even though I was ready to drop right where I was standing from exhaustion, I couldn't resist pulling the cabinet doors open and looking down. A vast empty chasm swelled before me, with dark shadows shifting on the shaft's walls. Far below, I could hear the echoes of maids opening the dumbwaiter's doors and extracting laundry, gossiping away happily as they did so. Unable to dismiss the urge, I reached out and gently strummed the taut ropes inside the shaft. At least now I didn't have to cater to Odette's constant demands. If I wanted to examine the inner workings of a machinery, I would be able to, so long as no one saw a princess engaged in such behavior. But my exhaustion was so great that not even the allure of a dumbwaiter could keep me away from my bed for long. I slowly closed the cabinet doors and latched them, promising myself that I would have more time to look at it the following day. There was so much about Haven Harbor that I was eager to learn more about. What powerful allies they would be to our cause. The next morning, I went to inspect the dumbwaiter again as soon as I woke up. Sunshine filtered in, throwing patches of light to replace the shadows on the walls, so I was able to examine the elaborate pulley system better. Fixed pulleys were secured to the top of the shaft, and when someone down below pulled one of the cords, I watched as the dumbwaiter was elevated by means of additional pulleys that moved with it. Fascinating. There were even tags that had Tess's and Korth's names on them. I eyeballed the distance between the tags and determined that they must serve to instruct the person pulling the ropes at the bottom of when to stop. The itch to climb directly into the shaft nearly overpowered me, but a soft rap on my door made me withdraw my head and hastily close the doors.
Odette, it's me!
Tess's sweet voice chirped from the other side of the door.
I thought we could get ready together today.
I couldn't help smiling, wondering if this was what it was like to have a sister. Enter. She bounced through the doors, a hairbrush in one hand and a gown flung carelessly over her other arm. Without being prompted, she plunked herself down on one of the stools and examined her reflection in the mirror.
If we both wear blue, we can be twins today, she announced. We can even have Gerda do our hair the same.
I love that idea, I told her with equal enthusiasm, pulling up another stool and looking in the mirror as well. I wish my hair was as dark as yours. Then we really could be twins. She beamed as Gerda bustled in and began helping us get ready.
Korth likes you,
Tess announced.
He's really happy.
I have a hard time telling, I answered. Your brother is difficult to read and barely speaks to me. Tess eyed me.
Want to know the secret to get Korth to talk more?
Yes, I love secrets.
Me too.
Tess's face fell slightly.
Does it matter what he talks about?
I will take anything at this point. She nodded solemnly.
Then just ask him about bridges. He'll start talking.
Any bridge? Looking me dead in the eye, she slowly nodded her head up and down.
Any bridge. It will be boring, but at least he'll talk.
Thanks for the tip. I'll have to try it. Tess beamed.
That's what sisters are for.
I wouldn't know. I've never had one.
You do now. I'm your sister.
I couldn't help returning her smile, glad that I wouldn't have to exploit this girl who trusted so freely and wholly. So you are. With a meaningful look at her, I tapped the side of my nose. Let me know if you think of anything else to help me get to know your brother. During our stroll in the courtyard, Korth remained stiff and silent. No matter how many questions I asked about his day, he would only respond with short phrases that were courteous but didn't invite more conversation. Across the lawn, a narrow bridge curved over the moat, leading to a closed door on the east side of the castle, nearly hidden away in the hedges that bloomed with flowers. I wonder how much weight that could hold, I mused aloud, nodding at it. I don't know much about bridges. Instantly, Korth's entire demeanor brightened.
That's a simple footbridge that can support upwards of 1,000 pounds. But most bridges will differ on how much weight they can hold based on the length of the bridge, materials used, and the design specifications.
Excitedly, he pointed to the drawbridge in the distance.
That one, on the other hand, can support carriages and horses, but their payloads are actually much smaller than most people think because of all the moving components that are used in the assembly. But I'd like to upgrade the infrastructure to something less prone to erosion. Since the materials will corrode over time, we will need a more robust system in place.
I made to step off the path to take a shortcut over to examine the drawbridge, but Korth's arm became iron beneath my fingers.
We aren't supposed to walk on the grass.
I'm sure the gardeners wouldn't mind if the prince does it.
But they're the rules.
Resisting the urge to roll my eyes, I nodded politely. Of course. I lost my head from your enthusiasm. Tell me more about bridges. He did so, barely pausing to draw breath, and I made a mental note to thank Tess for her tip.
Most people don't recognize how important bridges are to the economy. Just like how sirens prevented trade when our ships couldn't take to the seas, merchants can't trade in other cities and towns if rivers block their way and they don't have safe passageways. I even heard.
He lowered his voice as if he were about to reveal the answer to life's greatest mysteries.
That in Berkway, their stone arch bridges support entire aqueduct systems that provide running water to the entire kingdom.
Korth sucked in air, marveling at such a phenomenon.
I've always wanted to visit. Once Tess is 14, she will attend a finishing school there, and I told her I would take her.
Because you want to ensure that she arrives safely? Or to examine their bridges? Korth's cheeks tinged pink, and I found myself admiring how attractive he was.
Both. But can you imagine? Their streets are even kept cool because they have aqueducts that run under the roads filled with water that absorbs the heat of the summers. All because they have the stone bridges that go from hill to hill, sometimes spanning several miles. They have to maintain a certain angle, see, to ensure that the water is always running at a downward slope and doesn't pool in recessed areas.
You seem to know a great deal about them if you've never seen them yourself.
I've read about them. Do you know what a keystone is?
No, tell me. Korth did so, lovingly detailing more facts about different types of bridges than I ever dreamed one could know. After describing each of the different types of bridge load-bearing capacities, he went on to give his opinion on the efficacy of the various construction techniques and architectural styles as compared to the cost of labor and materials, as well as the duration of the construction period. I nodded, doing my best to absorb the information that clearly meant so much to Korth, because if talking about bridges made him feel more connected to me, I would gladly talk about bridges. But after a lengthy lecture about the geometry of arches and how they compared to the more triangular construction of truss bridges, my brain felt as saturated as a soaked sponge, and all new information simply dribbled away and was lost.
I'm sorry. This must be very boring for you.
Korth apologized. No, not at all. I'm fascinated by what interests you. With a coy smile, I asked, Is that why you kept looking out of the carriage window when you brought me here from the harbor? Korth shrugged one of his shoulders.
One of the reasons.
I've never been to Berkway either, I said, but I look forward to you showing me the bridges there. We'll be married by then.
I'd love to show you.
Korth placed his hand over mine that was curled around his elbow, and for the first time, it didn't feel stiff and awkward.
What interests you?
I raised one shoulder. It really isn't a typical interest for a princess, but...
What?
As I'd expected, Korth's relief at my expressing genuine interest in his unconventional passion had made him much more eager to listen to mine. I have an interest in dumbwaiters. Silly, isn't it?
Not at all,
Korth assured me. I've never seen any as large or grand as the ones here. I spent far too long examining the one in my room last night, and then again this morning. He perked up again.
I've never thought much about them, but they are interesting, aren't they?
Have you ever looked at the pulleys? I was trying to figure out how many are needed to move such heavy loads. You would probably be able to figure it out since you're so good at mathematics and the architecture of bridges.
There would be some similarities. Any simple machine will share commonalities with others, and each pulley used to support the dumbwaiter will reduce the strength needed almost by half. Take the mathematical advantages of a lever, for example.
And he was off again, explaining at length about the scientific principles of how things worked. I let his words wash over me. Korth's tone, normally so flat and monotonous, had taken on an almost giddy quality, so I felt nearly as enthused about his interests as he was, though I couldn't think of anyone I'd ever met as interested in bridges as Korth was. The rest of our walk flashed by in no time, and our chaperone, upon hearing snippets of our conversation, had retreated many more paces back, clearly confident that nothing inappropriate or overly romantic could or would happen when Korth was on one of his monologues about the inner workings of machines and bridges. Chapter 9. For the remainder of that week, Korth took time each morning to take me on a stroll through the gardens or around the lake. He used his list of questions less and less each day as we discussed our unconventional interests, and I never once had to touch a door handle in Korth's presence. As pleased as I was that I had succeeded in improving our relationship for the benefit of the rebellion, it would have been a lie to say that my eagerness to converse with him was exclusively for the rebellion's benefit. Korth seemed genuinely interested in my unconventional fascination as I described the differences between the dumbwaiter systems and voiced wonderings about the exact mechanisms so we could replicate the same systems at home. It became easy to procrastinate other topics of conversation that would be of more use to the rebels when I saw how raptly Korth paid attention to me. In addition to bridges and dumbwaiters, I discovered that Korth and I had several other common interests, from simple things like our favorite color, blue, to more contemplative things like philosophy and our interpretations of various works of literature. I had never been more grateful for Odette's laziness and indifference to her studies than I was at that point. How else would I have been able to keep up my current disguise otherwise? The conversations quickly became the highlight of my day, as the rest was often filled with dull wedding preparation tasks that involved a great deal of color matching, flower selections, and measuring for a new wardrobe. Korth attended so many meetings and hosted so many delegations during the day that I couldn't see how he would ever be able to keep them all straight and adequately prepare for each one. In the afternoons, while Korth was occupied with his obligations, Tess often sought out my company, laden with whatever task her tutors had assigned her. She often practiced her flute or sat next to me while she reviewed notes about legal proceedings or composed speeches. The instant Korth was out of meetings, she would stick to his side so closely that it was easy to see why Korth affectionately referred to her as a little shadow.
"You look better in blue than you do in yellow,"
Tess told me as she studied the dress Gerda laid out for the evening meal.
"The one you wore yesterday made you look like a haystack. A pretty haystack," she amended quickly.
"I thought you were supposed to be practicing your handwriting," I told her with a smile.
"I am, see?"
She held up her paper to show 6 copied lines, which she had written very slowly, biting her lower lip in concentration as she carefully formed each word in neat penmanship. She flipped the paper around to study it.
"Everyone says Korth's handwriting is better than mine."
"He's older than you are," I pointed out. "So he's had more time to practice." Tess let out a huff.
"Practice, practice, practice. I don't want to practice things anymore. I want to just do them. I'm old enough to make my own decisions."
"What would you decide to do if you could make any decision yourself?" Tess thought.
"I would go to the Night of Masks festival in town."
"Why's that?"
"It sounds fun. Everyone wears masks, and there are booths and games. I heard that there are some performers, like acrobats and jugglers who throw swords and torches."
"Why don't you go?" She wrinkled her nose in annoyance.
"It's only for grown-ups, and I have to be asleep at night."
"Maybe I will have to go with Korth, and then we could tell you about it." Tess rolled her eyes and went back to copying lines.
"He doesn't go to parties. He says he likes fun, but he never actually does anything fun."
"I'm sure he does something. When you talked to him yesterday, what was he doing?" She shrugged.
"Just shining his shoes. He always does that before he sees you."
I raised an eyebrow. "Wouldn't he have a servant do that?"
"No, he said they never get them shiny enough, so he had me read him his reports while he did it. He told me it is good to practice public speaking, so I'm not as bad as he is. But I think he just wants to impress you."
"Really?"
"Yes."
She looked up from her work, her large dark eyes shining in earnest.
"Do you like shiny shoes?"
I thought about it. I had never paid much attention before. "Yes, I do," I decided. "Do you?" Tess focused on her paper, her forehead puckered slightly as she tried to form a cursive G.
"I don't know. I don't care about boys yet."
"Yet, is it?" I asked teasingly. "You will one day?" She shrugged.
"I guess. Mama says I will marry Prince Ernst from Berkway one day, but he isn't very nice all the time. He thinks girls are annoying. He's 13.
I chuckled. "Well, most boys think that when they're that age. Give him time. Maybe by the time you're grown up, he will have changed his opinion." She wrinkled her nose at me.
"Or maybe he won't. You're lucky to be marrying Korth. He's nice, and he says I'm smart."
"Because you are." She beamed. When Korth came to escort me for our walk in the courtyard the next day, I couldn't help glancing down. His shoes were so thoroughly polished that they were practically mirrors. "Your shoes are the shiniest I've ever seen," I told him as I took his arm. "I'm very impressed." Korth's chest inflated so rapidly that he was in danger of floating into the sky. A shy smile curled his lips upward.
"I shined them myself."
I gave his bicep a soft squeeze and felt him flex slightly beneath my fingers. Charming him was becoming easier and easier. I could tell he liked me. The softness in his eyes when he looked at me, the hesitant way he touched me. I had him right where I wanted him. "How many meetings do you have today?"
"About 8. Most are to review the tariffs on our imports from different kingdoms, but there are a few about a criminal trial coming up, and one is to listen to a petition about improving the harbors. Now that the fishing industry has picked up, we need to expand the docks.
You must tire of listening to so many people every day. I glanced back as he guided me through the fruit orchard. Godfrey lurked in the distance, glaring at how close Korth and I were to each other, even though it was only our arms touching.
Talking tires me more than listening,
he confessed. Unless it's about bridges, I teased.
Except then.
We continued walking around the perimeter of the estate, where I could see houses in the town beyond, which all had an excessive amount of foliage surrounding them, trees, bushes, and hedges. It was a stark contrast to the castle's neatly manicured lawns and flower beds. I tilted my head, staring at each plot of land that was flooded with shrubbery. While it wasn't the sort of tangled undergrowth one would find in a forest, the yards did look cluttered with so many bushes, some that had grown up so high that they rose past door height on either side of the windows. The brief closeness I'd felt to Korth while we'd shared our unconventional interests petered out, replaced with memories of how the commoners in Ebora were so overworked and exhausted that they didn't have the time or energy to care for landscaping either. Such a task would fall far below other, more pressing needs, like feeding their families or finding work. The families here didn't seem to share the same sunken, hollow look that those in Ebora did, but I couldn't think of another reason as to why the flora would be so untended. My shoulders became more rigid as I reminded myself that the man whose arm I clutched, as nice as he seemed, was still a royal. Just like Odette.
Do you like the plants?
Korth asked as he followed my gaze.
Are there many here that are different from Ebora?
Several, though it seems very overgrown for the civilians.
It has to be.
My eyebrows furrowed as I took in the sight of one hedge that had been trimmed to look like a siren. Why's that?
We have a lot of hurricanes, and the shrubbery here act as deflectors that absorb the gusts of wind. Otherwise, flying debris would batter the buildings. The more plants stand in the way, the less likely they are to have broken windows. As long as they keep the trees healthy and trimmed so branches don't fall, it is actually a safety hazard not to have foliage surrounding your home.
I paused, having never considered such a thing before. I couldn't imagine that Raquel and Odette had such motivations when they looked at their own citizens. The castle doesn't have such things.
Our structure is made of stone,
Korth pointed out.
And we have storm shutters if a hurricane is headed our way. But our villagers need more protection. We hold informational lectures about preparedness at the start of every rainy season and distribute leaflets. There is a committee that just started to prepare those, since hurricane season will begin soon.
Can they all read? I asked curiously, the closeness to Korth blossoming once more.
Naturally. We take great pride in educating all our citizens.
I fell silent. The way he talked about his subjects was so vastly different than how I was accustomed to Odette speaking of them, as if they were something disgusting she had accidentally stepped in and was eager to be rid of.
Don't you also care about teaching literacy to civilians?
He prompted after an extended silence. Yes, of course, I said in a rush. That's very important to me. We just focus more on job training. After all, fishermen don't need to know how to read in order to fish.
But literacy would help them research more effective methods and aid them in ensuring that they aren't being taken advantage of during trade.
I nodded pensively. That's true. I would be very interested to examine systems you have in place to achieve such a high literacy rate, so we can implement a similar model in Ebora. Korth spent the rest of our walk eagerly explaining in detail how his kingdom had managed to educate all of their citizens while still preparing them for the specific skill sets required of their occupations.
Uneducated people are easy to control,
Korth told me, his forehead creasing from how sincerely he was speaking. My gaze was continually drawn to it, and I found it oddly adorable.
And I want my subjects to think for themselves, so they aren't manipulated or taken advantage of.
My heart throbbed. I wish every leader thought that way. With his earnest idealism and stalwart convictions in addition to his physical attractiveness, I was still baffled by his claim of being inexperienced with romance. Were all other women in this kingdom blind and oblivious? Or had he truly been completely faithful to a distant fiancé he barely knew for all these years? As I prepared for bed that evening, I couldn't help but think of Korth and how to handle gaining his confidence. If I threw myself at him or tried to seduce him outright, he would panic and withdraw. I knew it. Not to mention that the dratted chaperone tailed us closely no matter where we went. Korth already liked me. I knew enough about men to at least know he found me attractive, and we shared similar interests. Was it enough to convince him to lend me his army when the time came? The pillow cushioned my head as I slowly lowered it, staring out of the open window. The sheer sea-blue curtains fluttered as the salty breeze flurried around the room, ruffling any loose papers and tugging playfully at my hair. Everything here in Haven Harbor seemed to run so smoothly. The economy was prospering, the citizens were hardworking and educated, and their navy was legendary. It was no wonder that Raquel was so eager for his daughter to marry into the royal family here. Every leader would want to form a political union. I tucked my arm under my pillow. Any father would be thrilled to have his daughter marry a man like Korth. Memories from that day danced across my mind's eye, and as drowsiness overtook me, they shifted into visions that were increasingly unrealistic. I had always hated dreaming. One would assume that I would look forward to each night, given that I was now sleeping in more comfort than I ever had before. But I despised the fact that my subconscious could play tricks on me when I was at my most vulnerable and give me thoughts that should never cross my mind. As I fell asleep that night, I was reminded of exactly why I wished I could never dream again. I laughed at Odette as she fled from a gaggle of angry geese, Curdy taunting her as she ran away, her kerchief flying off as her hair whipped around her neck. I relished the idea of Odette struggling so much when she'd had everything handed to her on a silver platter her entire life. She deserved this humiliation and suffering. Every noble should have to labor as much as the common class. Perhaps that way, she would finally have the slap of reality that she so desperately needed. Mud splattered Odette's face and clothing as she waded through the marsh at her feet. Often, the geese would flap their massive wings and advance with frightening speed to peck at the princess.
"Remember your duty is to the rebellion,"
a voice that sounded like father's chided me.
"Why do you waste your time mocking Odette when you have a mission to complete?"
Of course, I mustn't delay my true assignment. I glided away from the goose yard to find Korth, the lake around me dissolving as my mind searched to locate the reason I was in Haven Harbor. The setting around me swam, and when it came back into focus, I found myself back at home in my tiny servant-sized bedroom, with Korth materializing in front of me, looking just as much at home as I felt. As much as I wished that I didn't notice, my eyes were continually drawn to the taut fabric that stretched between his shoulders, accentuating his broad, muscled chest. Heat rose to color my cheeks. This time, he didn't call me by the princess's name.
"Dahlia,"
he said softly, his voice seducing me far more effectively than any love potion ever could.
"Dahlia,"
he repeated, reaching out for me. I felt my hand slip around his broad shoulders. Even if he was considered to be a dull rule follower, he really was unusually handsome. I found myself examining his tanned face and strong jaw. His dark hair, always so neatly combed and parted, had flopped across his forehead in an unruly way, giving him a dashing, roguish look. He looked far more like the nefarious outlaw I deserved, rather than the upstanding, handsome prince I knew. His dark brown eyes bored into mine with a smoldering heat that rendered me breathless. For Ibora, I thought, clutching at the vain hope that this wild, instinctual attraction was merely my way of showing that I was completely devoted to my mission, willing to do anything to make Korth fall in love with me. And falling in love with me was exactly what Korth was doing. His hands caressed my sides, drawing me closer as any thought of this being a sham relationship faded from my thoughts. How had I never noticed the goodness and honesty in Korth? Of course, he had been physically attractive, but he embodied everything I wished I could be, just and loyal, trustworthy and sincere. I wished that for a moment I could purge myself of my lies and deceit and experience what it was like to be loved with no ulterior motive in play.
Dahlia,
he whispered once more. I would never tire of hearing him say my real name. A burning desire flared up down the very depths of my soul as he inclined his face toward mine, and I realized that more than anything, I wanted to be with Korth. I woke in a cold sweat, night's darkness still pressing on my eyes. "What was that?" I choked out, hands shaking as I pressed my palm across my forehead. My finger traced along my lower lip. I could still vividly imagine the passion with which Korth had been about to kiss me in my dream as if it had been real. My heart leapt within my chest, applauding the outrageous idea my brain had concocted for a nighttime vision.
my lady?
One of the guards assigned to me gently knocked on the door to my chambers, his voice hesitant, no doubt wondering if he had imagined me speaking or not.
Are you all right?
"I'm fine," I called back, eager to be left alone. "Nothing to worry about." Though the specifics of most dreams trickled away as quickly as water trying to stay in cupped hands, the details of this particular dream stayed fresh and sharp in my mind, replaying over and over no matter how many times I tried to ward off the improper thoughts. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. Korth was a means to an end, nothing more. I couldn't think of him as anything else, or I wouldn't have the strength to betray him when the time came. Chapter 10. For the rest of that night, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fall asleep. I stared at the canopy over my bed, but the only image that came to mind was Korth with his tousled hair from my dream. After more than an hour of lying in bed, I finally concluded that I wouldn't get back to sleep and got up, wrapping a robe around myself and walking out to the balcony. From what I could tell, there were very few illuminated windows this early in the morning. The bakers would no doubt be awake already, and a few fishing boats dotted the horizon, but everything else remained still and silent. Elbows supported by the railing, I propped my chin on my hand and stared at the quiet, prosperous town sprawled out below me. I wanted a life like this for the people in Ibora. Back home, commoners didn't know what it was like to live without fear. When Korth walked through town, people would likely bow or raise their hands in greeting with smiles on their faces. When Princess Odette walked through town in Ibora, her citizens had scurried away, averting their sunken eyes and shielding their children. Here, everything felt vibrant and colorful, while Ibora was a drudgery of dull grays and misery. I couldn't imagine that Korth would ever have been happily married to Odette, but his dedication to duty would undoubtedly drive him to fulfill his commitments. Knowing his idealism, he would probably hold out hope that he would be able to inspire change in Ibora if he was engaged to the true Princess Odette. I sighed. Even if Korth wanted to help the people in Ibora and had married Odette, I knew enough about politics to know that it would take months, if not years, to enact any proposed laws. Then there would be the issue of formalized committees to analyze the current situation and formulate action plans. My fellow countrymen couldn't afford to wait on the hope of change someday in the distant future. Families were being torn apart and lives were being destroyed right now. We didn't need a slow change in the political climate over a period of time. We needed to be liberated. The sky shifted from pitch black to inky blue, the first sign of the impending dawn. I stared hungrily at the horizon, How long until my people would emerge from the eternal night we were forced into and get to see the dawn of a new era? Any king would be better than Raquel. When I was a young girl, I kept hoping for an end to the siren plague. Not because I was particularly frightened at the prospect of a siren calling to me, but because I longed for the day when a foreign nation would see the injustices dealt to the subjects in Ibora and have the bravery to step up and act on behalf of those who couldn't defend themselves. That hope had been blotted out over the years. Each beating I witnessed and each mother's cry I heard reinforced the message that we were entirely on our own. Unless I managed to trick Korth into sending an army, it wouldn't happen. A wry smile lifted my lips as I tried to imagine how the confession would go if I tried to be honest. Korth, I need to tell you something. I'm not really Odette. I'm actually a servant who overthrew the true princess because I don't agree with her politics. But even though I led a mutiny and committed treason and sent her entire guard into the hands of pirates, will you still send an army for me against the father of your real fiancé? It would mean a lot. I scoffed. Everyone claimed they wanted honesty, but they really didn't. They wanted to be comfortable living their lives, blissfully unaware of any problem that didn't affect them. It was one thing to battle a trial on your own and gain new perspective. To watch someone else fight a battle and then have the courage to aid that struggling person, even without a personal reward in sight, was a quality that I was increasingly sure that almost no one possessed.
Your Highness!
I jumped and looked around for the speaker, but the noise was too far away to be in the same room.
What are you doing?
The voice sounded as though it had come from both below and behind me. A muffled tone answered the maid's indignant cry, but was too low and garbled for me to understand any of the words. I inclined my ear. It seemed as though the sounds were drifting in through one of the open windows and echoing in the walls of my room as well.
Even if you are interested in its mechanics, it isn't a prince's duty to climb into a dumbwaiter shaft to inspect pulleys. And before the sun is even risen at that! What if something had happened to you?
I bit back a laugh as Korth's low, muffled voice rumbled a response. Their conversation faded as I heard the snap of windows below being shut. Eager to hear more, I returned inside and pressed my ear against the doors hiding the dumbwaiter shaft. But other than the distant grinding of gears and the whirring of the ropes being fed through the pulleys, I couldn't make out any more of what they were saying. A faint pink glow lit up the sky outside, and a soft rap came at my door. "Enter," I called, stepping away from the dumbwaiter. Gerda came in, laden with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Your Highness," she said brightly. "You're up early. Did you rest well?" "Very well, thank you." Gerda chattered away cheerfully as she helped me get ready for the day. I studied my reflection while she styled my hair. Based on appearance alone, I should have Korth falling at my feet. And while he seemed interested, he wasn't doing anything about it. And our conversations about bridges and dumbwaiters, while enjoyable, weren't doing anything to win Korth's undying loyalty. Looks alone clearly weren't enough to gain Korth's confidences. So what was? When he came for me that morning, Korth's shoes were shinier than ever, and his hair was so neatly combed that each strand of hair was perfectly in place. Despite my best efforts to purge the dream from my memory, from the moment I saw Korth, both the images and sensations of my dream came flooding to the forefront of my mind in full force. For the first time, I felt flushed as Korth brushed his lips against my knuckles and found myself tongue-tied. "Wonder good to see. Good morning," I said in a rush, hating how my voice choked up and I fumbled for words. No blushing, stammering girl would ever be able to win over a powerful prince. I cleared my throat and let out a controlled breath. "My apologies. I seem to have mixed up my greetings today. You have quite the effect on me." I slipped my hand around his arm and waited for Korth's chest to swell with pride each time it did when I complimented him, and wasn't disappointed.
I was going to take you to meet my Nona today,
Korth told me.
She wasn't at your dinner, but I try to visit her every day for at least a few minutes. She always said she wanted to meet the girl I would marry.
The Queen Dowager? I asked as he led me down a long corridor. I thought she passed away some years ago.
She did. Nona is my father's mother, so they weren't royalty. My mother inherited the throne, and my father is consort.
But your Nona lives at the palace? That is kind of you to have her stay. Korth held another door open for me as we wended our way up to the turret, still tailed by Godfrey.
Well, she needs extra tending to these days. She used to be quite brilliant, but her mind sometimes wanders. Not quite in the same way you described the servant girl you brought with you, but you'll see. This is her door.
He knocked softly.
Nona, it's Korth.
Who?
A creaky voice came from the other side of the door.
It's Korth, your grandson. I have someone I want you to meet.
The door was opened by a nursemaid, and my nose was immediately filled with the scent of herbs and medicines that lingered around aging individuals. Korth's grandmother was in bed, sunshine streaming in through the window so that a rectangle of light was cast on her bed. Dust particles floated in the sun's rays, swirling as the air current from the opening door swept them into some forgotten corner of the room. Korth's grandmother was very old, with paper-thin, wrinkly skin and fragile white hair. She was squinting at Korth, adjusting wide glasses on her nose with shaking hands.
Orion? Is that you?
No, I'm his son. Remember? I'm Korth.
He sat down on the edge of her bed and took her frail hands in his.
I have someone I want you to meet.
You look like my son,
Nona babbled.
He's a handsome boy, Orion is. You look just like him.
Yes, because he's my father,
Korth said patiently.
Remember, Nona? He got married and had me and Tess, your grandchildren. Here, I want to introduce you to my fiancé, Princess Odette.
Nona didn't seem to have heard all of what he said.
Orion says he will marry the princess one day.
She let out a creaky laugh.
Isn't that the silliest thing you've ever heard?
He did marry her. I'm their son, and this is Princess Odette.
Korth looked pointedly at me, and his grandmother followed his gaze. Her eyes, which had been unfocused, suddenly sharpened. Good morning, I greeted her, holding my hand out to her. It's a pleasure to meet you. She squinted her eyes again, but this time it was as though she could see right into my very soul, and she didn't take my hand.
Stay away from my grandson,
she hissed. Her innocent, babbling demeanor suddenly changed, and I withdrew my hand, thoroughly unnerved.
What?
Korth stammered.
Nona, this is Princess Odette, my fiancé.
This woman will bring you nothing but heartache.
Her former wispy tone had vanished, replaced by something cold and waspish. I laughed nervously. What makes you say that?
I can always tell.
I'd never felt so wrong-footed and unnerved in my life. She had no way of knowing my true intentions. Our plot hadn't been discovered. But what could I possibly say that wouldn't come across as insensitive, but still help me defend myself? I wouldn't do that to Korth.
She's right, Nona. Odette and I are getting married soon. We care for each other.
I don't like her.
Korth's grandmother was becoming increasingly upset. Her pale cheeks took on patches of blotchy redness, and her fingers shook worse than ever.
I don't think you should marry her. Pick someone else.
My heart hammered and my throat suddenly felt parched. Unsure of what to do with my hands, I wrapped my arms around myself like a protective covering, shielding me from the wrath of Korth's grandmother as the nursemaid moved in and sat next to her patient.
Nona,
Korth began in a consoling tone.
You just met Odette. You don't know her yet. If you get to know her, I'm sure you'll like her."
The sharpness faded from her eyes, and she slumped back against her pillows, docile once more. "You're a handsome young man. You look just like my son, Orion. Have you met him?" Her lucidity vanished just as quickly as it had come, but my apprehension remained. What if Korth trusted his grandmother's judgment? Surely not if she couldn't even remember her own grandson anymore. But she had remembered him at that point. I couldn't stop myself from retreating several steps to give Korth privacy with his grandmother, wishing I could fade into the background and avoid being detected again. I was confident I would be able to convince Korth that his grandmother's judgment of me was not to be trusted, but if the experience was repeated over and over, who knew how quickly seeds of doubt would be sowed? I couldn't afford to let Korth develop any reservations about our relationship. Korth, clearly torn between defending his fiancé and showing respect for his elders, continued to talk quietly to his grandmother for several more minutes. "You'll come see me again, won't you, Orion? I miss you."
"I'm Korth, but yes, I promise I will come see you again tomorrow. I always visit you, and your son will come by later this evening."
"Goodbye, Orion," she trilled.
"I'm sorry about that,"
Korth apologized later.
"I don't know what came over her when I introduced you. Are you all right?"
"I'm fine." I ran my tongue across the smooth fronts of my teeth, wondering if it would be better to ask Korth if he believed his grandmother's mistrust, or if I should assume he wouldn't believe the ramblings of an old, forgetful woman. I didn't enjoy being accused, but I suppose it is similar to the servant girl I brought. Sometimes she thinks things that aren't true as well. It's unfortunate, really. Korth nodded sadly.
"It's the main reason I wanted the family you brought to stay together. I know how difficult it is to have a family member forget things. Nona used to be well known as an excellent judge of character, but her memory has been fading more and more lately. Tess and I have an easier time with it, but it has been a struggle for my father in particular."
"I'm sorry. I can only imagine how painful it would be to have a parent unable to remember their child."
"I don't want you to ever feel unwelcome here,"
Korth said with a backward glance at his grandmother's fading door. I smiled graciously at him. "I'm here for you, and no family is perfect. If they all acted perfect, I would wonder if you were hiding something."
"I would never hide anything from you. I'm glad I can trust you to do the same for me."
I made sure to show my dimples as I returned his fond expression. "I'm glad I can always trust you to be honest."